Hello, YouTube, and welcome back to me trying to read every single lost episode creepypasta that I can get my hands on. Today, we'll be reading Bad Berries. I have no idea what this one's about, so why don't we get right into it? Bad Berries. In 2000, the summer before my junior year in high school, I spent a lot of time wandering around my town's indoor mall alone. I was always hoping I would run into one of my friends, but I was the only one who lived close enough to walk there. And nobody I knew had a car yet. So the few times I saw them, they would usually be shopping with their parents. The mall staff got to recognize me, and I got so bored that I would offer to help do stuff like putting up posters for free. One day at the mall, I walked past this random guy sitting in one of the booths that usually sold sunglasses or keychains, but there wasn't any sign or merchandise or anything, and he stood up and asked me if I would like to be part of a television focus group. I knew about this sort of thing from that one Simpsons episode with Poochie, but I had never met anyone who had been part of one, so I was pretty excited. He just looked like a regular, bald, slightly overweight business guy in a gray suit, but he was really enthusiastic and friendly, and he had tried to shake my hand as soon as I approached him. He gave me a flyer with a room number and a time for the group. This was the only time I ever had to find a specific room in the mall by the address, so I had to ask an employee I knew for help, and even then it took an hour to figure out. The room was next to the staff offices, which were down a long, windowless hallway on the upper floor next to some massive store I never went to. Like a Babies R Us. So I had never really gotten close to it before this. I got there probably half an hour early, and the same guy from the booth was at a desk waiting there. Next to the desk, leaning up against a wall, was a massive 9-foot-tall cardboard cutout of a cartoon character I would later learn was Jimmy Neutron, probably, in retrospect, promotional materials for the upcoming film. I got sort of excited because 3D computer animation was a pretty big deal back then, and I thought maybe that was what I'd be watching. The guy running the focus group shook my hand again and gave me a survey to fill out ahead of time. The rest of the room looked sort of like a classroom with a bunch of desks facing a projector screen, and there was already about a dozen people at the desks filling out their surveys, so I sat down near the middle. Most of the survey was just demographic stuff, like how old I was, my religion, and my income. I wrote down 0. But it also asked about my viewing habits. For some reason, I lied and said that my favorite movie was A Bug's Life, because I guess I thought they'd rank my opinion higher if we were watching computer animation. They also asked how often I watched Nickelodeon, which was not at all, my family didn't have cable, and how many episodes I had seen of The Angry Beavers. I lied on both of those too. I had never even heard of the show. But I got the point that it was probably a kid's show, and at that point I started to realize how weird it was that I was the youngest person in the room. Nobody else in the group even looked like they were under 30. I finished the survey and handed it to the guy at the desk, and he gave me some blank paper to take notes on. I was just waiting at my desk for another half an hour until everyone else had arrived and finished their surveys. And then the guy stood up in front of the screen and introduced himself as Sammy, then explained how the group would work. He would play 2 10-minute episodes of The Angry Beavers, with a time clock running in the corner, and we should write down any impressions with a timestamp to bring up in a discussion afterward. Before beginning, he gave this huge grin and raised his eyebrows really high, and told us to pretend these were the first episodes of The Angry Beavers we had ever seen. Then he turned off the lights, and I immediately realized that it was way too dark in the room to write, even with the projector on, so I just watched the episodes without taking any notes. The first episode was called The Declaration of Independence. The plot was that the two beavers, Daggett and Norbert, didn't want to clean up their own place, so they hired cleaners out of the phone book. The cleaners turn out to be ants, which were depicted as little faceless, limbless, black apostrophe shapes who communicated by holding up cartoon signs. The ants loved working, and after they cleaned up the place, they demanded more work. And when the two beavers struggled for a few seconds to think of anything, they started trashing the place so that they could clean it up again. Probably half of the episode was taken up by a sequence of one ant smashing an object and then another one sweeping up the pieces, accompanied by a lot of slide whistle noises. To get rid of the ants, the beavers opened a phone book again and hired an anteater, who stuck his huge head through the window and scared the ants away. The episode ended with the beavers happily relaxing on top of the messy pile in their house. I was pretty disappointed at the start that this was just regular animation, but as the episode went on, I couldn't believe how unfunny it was. The writing and pacing was really awkward, and the two characters didn't have any sign of individual personalities. The only thing that was a little funny was the fact that they flipped furiously through the phone book to find an exterminator, and somehow landed on the very first page listing aardvark. But honestly, I couldn't tell if this was a joke with really bad timing or if it was totally unintentional. It also bothered me a lot a few seconds later when the exterminator turned out to be a giant anteater, not an aardvark. But I was a weird kid who knew a lot about animals. The strangest thing about this episode, though, was that I could tell from the timestamp right on the screen that it wasn't even 5 minutes long. The next episode was called Bad Berries, and it began with the sequence of 3 red berries falling off of a branch and floating down a river, floating through all of this toxic waste and getting rained on by a weird green cloud, until a poof of smoke comes off of them in the shape of a skull. When they got rained on, there was a thunder sound effect, and I realized that the episode had been silent up to that point, with no music or running water sounds or anything. Eventually, the berries float through a gap in the beaver dam house, and the Daggett, the brown beaver, sees them. This whole part of the episode was so drawn out that it was nearly as long as the entire last episode. Daggett says, "I love free food," and picks up 2 of the berries, throwing them into his mouth. I expected him to make some weird face, maybe turn green and cough up smoke, but he just stood there for a few seconds after swallowing them without reacting. And then there was a hard cut to a sort of X-ray view of the inside of his body, with all of his organs having smiling cartoon faces. All at once, they all start screaming in these Mickey Mouse voices, their eyes bugging out, and their eyes and mouth sort of flickered and then turned pink. This pink liquid started to fill up Daggett's body from the feet up, and at this point the animation started getting really bad. The liquid was basically just a translucent pink filter with a wavy line on top that slowly rose, and the cartoon organs each seemed to be switching between 2 screaming frames per second. This whole sequence went on for a full minute, with the only sound being the squeaky, screaming noises. Once the liquid reached the top of his head, there was another hard cut back to the beaver's room. Only now Daggett was swollen and purple, and there were drops of pink liquid running down his face like cartoon tears or drool. He had the same animation style as the organs, just flipping between 2 poses, but he was also slowly getting bigger. The room was flooded with pink liquid. This happened for another minute, now in total silence until Norbert, the yellow beaver, walked in with a door squeaking and slamming sound effect. He just rolled his eyes and said, "Not this again." He then saw the last leftover berry and wordlessly tossed it into his mouth with a loud chomping sound effect. The same sequence with the X-ray view happened again. It might have been literally the exact same, except the silhouette matched the yellow beaver instead, and when it ended, it cut back to both of the beavers swollen up next to each other. Finally, it showed the outside of the dam, where the girl beaver was looking at the pink liquid spreading through the water. And she says, "Well, this will take a while to clean up." The camera slowly zooms out, and we see that the liquid is gradually filling the whole river. And in the background, the 2 brothers, still in the same cheap animation, have swollen up to be as big as buildings, and are still growing. Cut to the credits, still with no music, and the video ended at exactly 20 minutes. Sammy turned on the lights again, leaving the last frame of credits projected, and just looked at us smiling with his hands clasped together for a couple seconds, then asked us for our thoughts. A couple other people raised their hands, but all of them were talking about parts they thought was funny. They all mentioned it by the specific timestamp instead of describing the moment, so I didn't know what they were actually talking about, but since all of the examples were in the first 4 minutes, I could tell they were all from the Ant episode. Sammy didn't really respond to any of it, he just waited and pointed to the next person. There was eventually a moment where no one else seemed to have anything to say, and I felt uncomfortable with the silence, so I raised my hand and said that I thought bad berries was sort of gross. Sammy got a really serious look on his face, and he said, and I remember the exact sentence, "No, it isn't gross, it's surprising, and that's where the comedy comes from." I was a little shocked that he just directly contradicted someone in the focus group, and sort of embarrassed. And then a few other watchers joined in to say that they thought that one was hilarious. Not with any specific times, though. I stayed quiet after that, and pretty soon nobody else was saying anything, so Sammy just clapped his hands together and thanked us for our input, then told us that when we left, we would collect free keychains and a $20 gift certificate to Borders bookstore. I was actually pretty happy about that. By the time I got there, all the gift certificates were gone, so all I got was a keychain shaped like a Rugrats character's face. That was the last time I ever got a chance to be in a focus group, and probably the last time I would have agreed to, until years later when I did some research and found out how irregular that whole incident was. Around that same time, I finally decided to get some episodes of Angry Beavers on DVD from the library, and I was surprised to find that it was mostly actually funny, well animated, and well produced. Neither of the 2 episodes I first saw were on the discs, and apparently neither of them ever aired on TV. So I guess, in spite of Sammy's enthusiasm, someone along the line was smart enough not to let them see the light of day. And that is the end of the creepypasta. Let me think. Admittedly, I don't think I have seen any of the Angry Beavers episodes, and I'm happy to hear that neither of these episodes exist. I mean, provided maybe the Ants one, if there was some tweaking, would have been something to watch. I don't know. I don't know if it would have been funny, but it would have been something to watch. But Bad Berries, I don't see where Sammy would have gotten it's surprising and then it's funny, and then people somehow agreeing with that because there was absolutely nothing funny about it at all. I suppose gross would be a, fine way to put it, but calling it hilarious was a bit of a stretch too. Chipping him out a $20 gift certificate for a bookstore is a bit depressing too. Sorry the kid didn't share your enthusiasm. All in all, I see where they were going with this, but I can only give it like maybe a 3 out of 10. It just kind of feels a bit bland. I don't know. It would have been better if they offered a pink juice as like some sort of refreshment and the other people drank from it, but our protagonist didn't, and then saw the Bad Berries episode and saw the pink liquid, and he was just like, oh no. It was like connecting those 2 dots, and that would explain why people found it hilarious, or something, like they put something in the beverage that affected everyone else's viewpoint of the episode, but not our character. And then the cliche of like they all died or had some sort of illness or something afterwards. I don't know. I don't know. It just feels like it's missing something. Though, I guess I have to admit, when it's a lost episode creepypasta, it doesn't necessarily have to be bloody, gory, scary, I think. Because we're talking about episodes that just are lost to time. So they don't necessarily have to be scary, I suppose. But when you sit down to read a creepypasta, you're sitting down expecting to have something creepy and scary or unnerving be like consumed, by your eyes. And so that's kind of my point of approach. Like, I'm expecting something creepy or something unsettling and something scary. And some of these are just like, yeah, I heard of this episode or I saw this episode and I can't find it anywhere else, so I guess it's a lost episode. Like, I suppose. It technically is. But I don't know. That's why these entries where it's just in an episode no one's heard of with mild elements of spoop don't really get rated very high. Because it feels like a technicality. You can go shrug your shoulders. But it doesn't really give the sensation of, oh, something's wrong here. Then again, I've consumed so much creepypasta media that I think, hey, adding this cliche might help. But I feel like you have to execute the cliches well for them to work. If you just throw in, and then they all blew up, and then they were all evil, it just doesn't have the same effect. I don't know. Maybe just some of my own musings and ramblings, but let me know what you guys thought. Like I said, 3 out of 10 for me. I can see where they were going with it, but it just falls flat. It's just not enough to really grasp onto. But aside from that, I think it's a good time for me to say that it is bye-bye for now. Bye!